This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. Let's read Catechism, Constitution, question number 54, out of a total of 333 questions. Yeah, here it is. How is it known what number of people each state contains? Answer. Certain persons are appointed to count the people and take a written list of them. And I'd said last time the first census of the United States was the year 1790. 1790, and because the Constitution doesn't say who's supposed to do the counting, the President of the United States decided that he would use U.S. Marshals, and they're the ones that did the counting, the United States Marshal Service. Certain persons are appointed to count. Such a counting is called a census. And it takes place once in every 10 years. In the year 1790, the United States counted 3,929,326. Now that was up from almost 3 million people in the year 1776. Nobody knows for sure. But according to the records that are obtainable, that's between 2.5 and probably closer to 3 million. 1790, which 14 years later, they're pushing almost 4 million. Another 10 years, they're all pushing 5.5 million, our country is. 5,309,758 in the year 1800 when Tom Jefferson became president. Then in the year 1810, the next census was 7 million. Woo, jumped a couple more million, 7,239,903. So we had about 7.5 million people in America when we fought the British in the War of 1812. 7.5 million, according to the figures. The year 1820, another 10 years, 9,638,166. That's the year 1820. So we're upward 10, 12 million people by the time we get to the Mexican-American War. Well, doesn't sound like much now, but we were growing. Economies only prosper while population is growing. If population ever levels off, the economy begins to fail. That's a law of nature. You say, well, if the population continues to grow, won't there get so there's too many? And the answer is no. That hasn't happened yet anywhere in the world. Well, what about China? They got over 1 billion people, according to who? You're willing to believe those commies that they got 1 billion people? Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm not willing to believe it. I just flat say I don't know. I know there are a lot of people there. Of course, in India, the word is now India has more than China. Who knows? But I do know this. There's plenty of room left in this whole world. I mean, it's uncanny how much room there is just in our own country. You know, you could take all the people in our country. I did the math. You could take all the people in the world, and put them in the state of Texas, and each person would have a few hundred feet of living space. I know it's hard to believe, but when I did that over 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I did the math on that because I read a mathematician that was talking about it. He said that, and I figured it up. Square footage of the state of Texas, square miles, square footage, you could reduce it to that. And then all the people in the world at that time. And he had said initially that you could take all the people in the world and put them within the city limits of Orlando, Florida. I remember this. At that time, more like 40 years ago, you could take all the people in the world and put them within the city limits of Orlando, Florida, whatever that was at that time. And each person would have enough room, he said. They'd be crowded. But each person would have enough room, this is the way he described it, to stand, and he'd have enough elbow room to have a saucer and a cup and drink coffee. He wouldn't have much more than that, but he would have that. Most of Canada is a howling wilderness. Nobody lives there. And Canada is bigger than the United States. The fundamental relationship God has with mankind is that he is to be fruitful, multiply, and cover the land. He hasn't even come close. Oh, it's happening. You can't stop people from multiplying. They love to multiply. Well, no, they love sex, but multiplication is the inevitable result. Inevitable. Well, let's go to the next question. Oh, by the way, this is the year, it goes up to the year 1820, all pushing 10 million people. By the time we get to the war between the northern and the southern tiers of the states, there are about, best estimates, about 34 million people in America. See, the population, 1820, 1830, 1840. When my great-grandpa was born, there were about 34, well, he was born a little before that war, a little 34 million people. Now the population of our country since my great-grandpa is 10 times that and more. By the time we get to 1900, when Teddy Roosevelt was voted in to be president, 1900, that census came to about 100 million people. So between 1820, 10 million people, our population had grown by 10 in 80 years. That's pretty near 10 million people a year. Well, they were making babies like gangbusters, coming on like horseradish. How many people I'd talked to, and we used to look at the old pictures and houses, just a generation or two before, all the families were 8, 10, 12 children. Not some of them, pretty near all of them. That's become unfashionable. Why? Because of our economic prosperity. When people don't have money, they make babies. It's a law of nature. When people begin to get money and they can afford to have them, they stop. Why is that? It's a law of nature. I've never heard anybody that could explain it except sin. Even the Mexicans that are coming into this country, they get Americanized real quick. They stop having babies too. I used to ask Mexicans, well, how many children in your family? 14, 12, 10. Now I ask them a generation or two later, how many brothers and sisters did you have? I had 2 sisters. I had 1 brother. That's the way they talk now. Because they come here, they get prosperous. Sometimes it takes a generation or two because of the habit. And it's a religious thing. It's what God wants. He wants us to enjoy life. He loves babies. He loves them. Well, that's what of course, then by the time I was born, 100 million people in 1900. By the time I was born, as boomers, they call us, there was about between 150 and 170, depending upon in that range between the 50s and 60s, between 1950 and the boomers, they said, were 1945 to 65, but yeah, that's probably right. But within that range, it was still a lot less than 200 million people. Then by the time we get to our 200th anniversary, we're up to over 200 million people. Over 200 million. Hadn't been that long ago. Now we're over 300 million. See, the growth is becoming exponential. You can't stop what God has proclaimed will happen. Can't stop it. I don't care what you do. And, it's the judgment. I've thought of this. Maybe you'd think of it too. Is it the judgment of God upon our nation? He's going to get what he wants. Is it the judgment of God upon our nation because we've stopped having babies? that he's flooding us with foreigners by the hands of evil people, evil men, evil women? Well, I can't say for sure, but I can look at the Bible. And I can say, it says this is going to happen if you do that. And then I can look at what's happening and I say, well, stands to reason, I suppose. Should stop and make us pause and think. Girls aren't getting married now until they're 35, 40 years old. I remember when I was growing up, Miss Francine, there was one gal that my mother knew. She got married at age 35. And then everybody in the community was talking about it and how unusual that was. We went to the wedding. We liked her. She's a nice gal. And I don't know what the reason was. I just know it was unusual at that time. But now it's fashionable. Just downright fashionable to do that. Does God want that? I dare say not. No, he likes babies, and he likes the foundation of all government, all decency, the best health, education, and welfare institution ever established is the family of a man, a woman, and children. That's the best health, education, and welfare institution ever established. I'd never thought about that until Tom DeLay, who was majority leader of the House, came to near my home and did a fundraiser for me. And before he came, and this impressed me about him, before he came, apparently he had scoured news releases about me and things I'd said and on and on. And he found where I'd said that someplace. And he repeated it. Well, I'd said it in passing, but then when he said it, I said, hey, he liked it. Other people may like it. I need to can that phrase and use it. And I do. And I believe it. I know it. The Bible teaches it. And I see it. The erosion of one man, one woman, children. I know. It's hard to hold a marriage together. I know. It's almost impossible. That's because the devil focuses on ripping it apart as much as he possibly can. And to withstand it is almost impossible. Well, let's do one more question, and we'll do at least one more. Then we'll hear a song. 55, question 55. When members of the House of Representatives meet to make laws, are they all equal, or does one preside over them? Answer. They choose one of their own number, whose duty it is to preside over them. This according to our Constitution. While they are met to do business and see that they proceed in a regular and orderly manner in doing their public duty. This is he is called the Speaker. Why? Because he's up in front of people speaking. That's simple. Speaker of the House of Representatives, you see. Speaker of the Senate. That comes from Britain, the Parliament of Britain. Just like us, we got it from them, had two houses of their legislative branch, the House of Lords, the upper house, which is more permanent, and then the Parliament itself. And their head of each of those, of the Parliament, is called Speaker. All tax bills must originate in the House of Representatives. That comes from Britain. We are British in our institutions, in our law. The Constitution of the United States is a brief of our common law as it applies to government. Nothing new. No, there weren't any geniuses there that set this up. Oh, James Madison, George Washington. Well, God used them, but don't think they're any smarter than the next guy. What they did was they took what they had, what was already here, and they just undergirded it and strengthened it. I mean, even our first military code, George Washington took the king's rules from Britain, which he had lived under as a British officer, and changed the names, took King George out, took that out of it, and applied it to the Americans. We're a common law country. We still are, more intensely than them at this point. They also choose a person who is not one of their own number to keep a written account from day to day of all that is done by them while assembled. That written account is called the Journal of the House, as my buddy in the Virginia mountains says, the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives, and the person who keeps it is called the Clerk of the House. They also choose another person who is called their Sergeant at Arms. That's a common law phrase. Lawyers in Britain are still called sergeants, they say, at law. Sergeants at arm, we say sergeants. What does that mean? That means master. You're on top of the subject. Sergeant at arms, and who may, when so ordered by the House, seize, arrest any member who disobeys the rules, or who is charged by the House of Representatives with any crime, and imprison him. Throw his carcass in the hoosegow. That's the sergeant of arms. That's the authority he has. Why do they have one? Because they, and they alone, control everything that goes on within the House of Representatives. No, the Supreme Court of the United States has no authority to tell them what they can and can't do. The President of the United States has no authority to come in, to even enter, my friends, the House of Representatives without their permission, and it doesn't happen very often. The President only comes in there once a year to deliver his State of the Union message, and that is at their invitation. Where'd that come from? It came from the old country in Britain. The very few times that the king ever entered the chamber of the parliament, and he did so on a couple of occasions with a band of armed men to arrest the speaker. Oh, to put it bluntly, the next thing that happened was Parliament raised an army and went to war with the crown. You don't do that. What do we call that in America? Our Constitution of the United States never uses this phrase, but it's a common law doctrine of government. Separation of powers, and it's abundantly apparent our Constitution separates the powers, so much so, as I'd said, you're not allowed to go in the House of Representatives if you're a member of the Supreme Court or the President. No, that's separation. They have no say what goes on in there. Speech is absolutely free. And the same thing is true of the President and the Supreme Court. The Congress can't tell the Supreme Court what to do except by legislation, but the Supreme Court may reject it, just as the Congress may reject and the President may reject what the Supreme Court says. And anybody that tells you different is either a liar or they're just ignorant. And most of the people that say different are just ignorant, but it goes to the very top of our Ivy League schools that they say the Supreme Court of the United States is final. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States, their decisions are final for the federal courts, maybe. Yeah, that's true. But not for the Congress, not for the state legislatures, not for the presidents, and not for the governors. That's common law, friends. Isn't it beautiful? Well, who's running the country? Us. How do we do it? In the final analysis, by the decision of the jury. We'll get to all that later. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.